This is the most irreligious generation on the planet ever. Now, hold that thought, because this doesn't mean, as you say, Jez, that they're not interested in the transcendent. They are the least likely to see church, institutional church particularly, as the place to explore the big questions of life, but they are massively motivated by the big questions of life.
Welcome to the Reimagining Mission podcast, where we seek to equip Christians and see disciples multiplied across the UK and beyond. Hey, Jez, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, Jess?
Yeah, well, I'm going to answer, like British people, not too bad, not too bad. So it's never, well, great, fantastic, or it's never,
No,
it's rubbish, but it's not
we
too
like to
bad.
keep things on an even keel. We don't like to put ourselves out there too much.
Yeah, something like that. So how was your week? Any highlight? Anything special?
Yeah, it's been a good week, or maybe it's been a fantastic week, Jess. What about you? What have you been up to this week?
Yeah, that was a good week. Well, something happened this week, and I think it's the very first time that anything like that happened to me. So, well, as a good Christian, I'm used to read the Bible in the morning, right? And on that morning, I started to read the story of Joseph. And you know the scene where Joseph has to face his brothers, and they don't recognize him. And I was reading this story, I started to feel so moved that I had tears in my eyes, and I started to sob, and I was like, "What's going on?" So I don't know whether it's me becoming old and a little bit too sensitive, or either. And I hope that's a right answer. That the Holy Spirit is able to really move me through the stories, and I could really imagine myself in the scene, picturing everything around me. I was in the story, and it was so moving. And anything like that ever happened to you?
Well, I've got a confession. That actual story has also moved me to tears. Not this week, but in the mornings we've been reading through the Bibles with a Bible with the kids, and I remember reading that story with them, and I'm trying not to cry, and I don't really like tears. I kind of like, oh, please don't cry. It makes me feel awkward. So, but I'm crying. But interestingly, my daughter Mary, she's the same. So when she sees me cry, she comes over and tells me to stop, stop. So I cry at movies. So they're always looking at me to see if I'm crying. So yeah, I'm the sort of like, you won't see me sobbing in front of people, but you'll just see me at the back just wiping my eye, pretending I'm not crying because I don't want to be crying. But yeah, no, I'm a bit of a crier.
Yeah, well, it would be good to see us even, being more and more moved by those Bible stories. But to be fair, I don't understand why, the Hollywood industry, they're not making a great, great remake of those incredible stories. And maybe if anybody hears me, this is the next step, because, well, just to see what the Chosen has did, really the success of the Chosen. And I think you could do something absolutely great with all those stories. Maybe that's something they're going to do after the Chosen. Maybe they will start to go back to some biblical stories. I don't know.
Yeah, I do like the way they put the chosen together. You know, Jesus does seem to be quite a believable. Sometimes I don't know if you watch like the Jesus film. They're good, but they're not always that believable, are they? Like the character is maybe just it feels like it's a bit impersonal, but with the chosen, it
It's
does
like,
feel. I don't know what they've done. They've obviously written a pretty decent script, a way of putting it together. So yeah, no, I enjoy the chosen.
well, I really, really like what they did with Jesus, that he doesn't look like one of those Scandinavian top model, but they're really keeping him real. And well, he's not this top model, but still he's got something so attractive. And part of it is, his heart. Well, that I mean, they found a really great actor, but just to see how, yeah, tender he can be. I don't know how to express that, but that was really a good choice. And somehow, I feel like we need something real. And whether it's with churches or movies, I think we're a bit fed up of, artificial things, and we're looking for something more, how would you say that, Jazz? More, you know?
Authentic, maybe, is the
Yeah.
right word. That kind of idea that there's something that's something of integrity. Yeah, in that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think this is often in churches, isn't it? Like it's sometimes hard to break through just that superficial layer that often comes with just the way in which we gather, and it is really hard just to press through that so that we can get to really know each other and to be real with each other. And I think people are hungry for that.
Yeah, and not only people, but even more teenagers. And I can't stop thinking about, this interview we did with Rachel Gardner, where she speaks about that. And she speaks how, teenagers, they need something that is real, that is authentic. And they're somehow a bit fed up with religion, and they rejected their generation and the generation before they start to reject religion, but still they are thirsty for spiritual encounters, for something that is so real. Did you enjoy this interview with Rachel?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I took my first role within a church as a youth worker. I trained in theological training and then a professional youth work training, and I thought I was going to be a youth worker forever. I
Really?
didn't have any idea that I would be what I would be doing after. I just thought youth work. I loved young people. I loved working with them. But after about 7 or so years of ministry, I was a bit tired, and also like God, like I feel like God drew me on, and sometimes it's a bit like that in ministry. Is like youth ministry is a stepping stone, or seen as a stepping stone into further ministry, and it was just wonderful to see somebody who's just committed their lives to serving young people and championing them within the church and seeing a real place for them in the church. So yeah, it really stirred my own affections for young people and just reminded me just how important they are to in the church and how important it is that we seek to reach them.
And I really love the energy of Rachel. She's, full of joy, full of hope. She, you feel like, oh my goodness, I would like to go and spend a full afternoon even going shopping with her, because it must be just so fun. She keeps laughing, and well, just a very, very interesting lady. And yes, and I'm really thankful for her passion and her desire. And she said so many interesting things about how to raise teenagers, how to help them, and what is our role, whether we are a pastor or a mom, we can make a difference. And I really hope that you guys listening to us are going to enjoy as much as we did this interview with Rachel Gardner. Our guest today is Rachel Gardner. Rachel is the Director of Partnerships at Youthscape, a national youth ministry organization. As a youth worker, Rachel helped develop Romance Academy, a national project to promote healthy relationships with young people. Rachel is a best-selling author of a number of books for young people, especially young girls. Her work includes The Dating Dilemma, A Romance Revolution, and the Girl Deconstruction Project. Rachel and her family are based up in Blackburn, where they lead an intergenerational church plant. Rachel, it's great to have you with us today. So, Rachel, most of the people I know will be like, give me the toddlers, give me the children, but please don't give me the teenagers. I can't cope with teenagers. So, can you tell us why, on the contrary, you are so passionate by the young people?
I like toddlers, I like children, but please don't give them to me in big numbers. don't know what to do with them. I love working with young people. I, can I start with, it sounds a little bit of a worthy answer. My first answer is, I really believe it's a calling. I really believe that Jesus called me to work with emerging generations. I can take you back to a very specific moment when I was studying theology at university, and I really sensed God call me to, Leslie Newbegin talks about forwarding the gospel to a new address. So I really felt called. So I think that's what got me in, Jess, through the door, because I wasn't a very cool teenager. I didn't particularly enjoy my teenage years. So it's definitely a calling. But what's made me stay, I think, is young people are extraordinarily dynamic. They are open, they're curious, they are wear their hearts on their sleeve, most of them. And it's really fun. It's really, really fun. So I think for all those reasons, I'm a youth worker till the day I die.
And as you think about the church and young people, I think I heard you say once that in some way that young people are least likely to engage with the church than ever before, and yet in some ways they're also quite open spiritually. Is that something that you're finding when you're engaging with young people?
Yes, absolutely. I think you're right, Jez. I think if you're interested in research, anyone listening who likes a bit of research, there's a piece of research out at the moment called Youth Culture and Trends Report. Youthscape and the Boys Brigade have done it. And they've looked at evidence and stats and data from 10 years ago and then data from now. And there are some things that we can say with certainty, and that's that there's 40% less interest in young people today in churches, in Christianity, in terms of, do you call yourself a Christian? Yes, no, kind of thing. And so this is the generation that the most irreligious generation on the planet ever. Now, hold that thought, because this doesn't mean, as you say, Jez, that they're not interested in the transcendent. They are the least likely to see church, institutional church particularly, as the place to explore the big questions of life. But they are massively motivated by the big questions of life, by transcendence. And I think if we were to sort of zoom back a little bit and ask ourselves why, I would say that not only has institutional religion failed in their eyes, but so has secular society. So where does that leave you? And we know that things like witch talk, the hashtag on social media, is extraordinarily huge, because young people are saying, what else is out there? What are the powers out there? So you're right, there is this melting pot of less likely to see church as the place to ask the big questions, really motivated by the question. So the question for us as youth practitioners and church leaders is, where is this generation going to ask those questions? And that's a big question for us, isn't it?
Where is this generation going? Yeah, that's a huge question, Rachel. So you're talking about the fact that this generation is not into religion, yet they are highly spiritual, or they're looking for some kind of spirituality.
Yeah.
And when we go on social media, TikTok, things like that, there's a lot of witchcraft. There's a lot of spiritism.
Yeah.
I don't know how you say
Yeah.
that in English,
Yeah.
but so in how the church can attract those
Yes.
young people who have such a desire for spiritual
Yes.
encounters or experience.
Yes. Yes, that is brilliant, Jess. And you struggled with those words, and I do too, because this is part of what's going on. Is there's a kind of, sociologists call it neo-paganism, which is this generation, so Generation Z, those born after 1996. And I know that at the moment we're on the cusp of a new generation, possibly called Generation Alpha, those that are aged 14 and under. But if we're looking at direction of trends, the chances are that Generation Alpha will keep going in the same direction as Generation Z. So if they are less interested automatically in institutional religion, if actually they look at mainstream churches, particularly in the West, and they can point to scandals and abuse of power, and they see that across political parties, and this is a generation that are not interested in people who have positions of power for the sake of it. They're not deferential, but trust has to be earned, respect has to be earned. So if in a way the church is part of the problem for many young people in Gen Z, part of the oppressive ideologies. But you're interested in what else there is. If there's more to life than social media and popularity and the stuff that I can consume, that has to take you somewhere. And neo-paganism is this idea that you can actually create what that is. So it's quite agnostic. It's not belief in a God, but it's belief in faith. It's belief in something. It's a sense that there must be something out there. So go find it and you do you. If it works for you, great. I'm glad you picked up on witch talk again, Jess, because the interesting thing, so I'm on a deprived housing estate in Blackburn in the north of England. It's really poor. The community is really poor. Young people are tech poor. They don't go anywhere on holidays particularly. They don't have a lot of stuff. They are really interested in spirituality and they often see ghostly apparitions. That might be social contagion. It might be them making it up. It might be a little bit of they are seeing stuff. And as a Christian, I have a worldview that says there are powers and principalities. People do see things that are not good. There are forces working against us. But what does a young person do with that? Let's say they manifest something. Let's say they do a bit of Ouija. Let's say they try and connect with the dead or something like this, whatever's going on for them. Secular society around them says you've got one of two options. You're either making it up or you're having a serious mental health breakdown. Because there's no space in secular society to say, maybe there's something else there. So secular society cannot keep curious young people safe. Whereas actually the Church of Jesus Christ, we know that God's power is greater. We know that if you seek and if you knock, you will find life in all its fullness. But if you're in a society that says, no, there's no absolute truth out there, you just work it out for yourself, that's dangerous, actually, isn't it? That's not responsible for a society to say to young people, here's technology, here's no certainty, here's no absolutes, you just do you, go do it. Is it any wonder we have a generation of young people who are feeling emotionally and spiritually fragile? So I think that's another, you asked me earlier, Jess, why am I a youth worker? When I started as a youth worker 25 years ago, there were different conversations that were happening with young people, still about Jesus, still about life. But I think these are the conversations that I feel I really want to be at the touchstone of this space with this generation. Yeah.
Reflecting then on just the church and in terms of how does the church start to engage in that conversation, and how does the sort of everyday, youth worker who's working in a church or in a ministry, engage into that with young people in a way in which, as they share Christ and with them, that he becomes attractive to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
That he's not misunderstood.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yes. I think probably humanity have misunderstood Jesus from the moment he was walking the earth. But I think I know what you're saying, and many young people who are even in our churches are very secular in their thinking because they're not in a world that supports who is Jesus. In society, Jesus might be a historical character. If you listen to a Tom Holland podcast, you might be convinced he's a historical character, but you don't believe he's much more than that. So I think you're right, Jez. The questions are who is Jesus is, I think, the most important question for this generation. He's real, and I think what we need to do within our churches is really demonstrate that Jesus is real. What we find at Youthscape when we do deep dives of reading scripture, particularly the encounters of Jesus with people in the New Testament and the Gospels, we find that young people across the UK, we say to them, what do you see? What's interesting about this? But what they do is they come back with the moral lesson they've got from it. So we'll read stories like the Zacchaeus story with them or the story of the woman at the well. And when asking this group of unchurched young people or young people from a Church of England school or some like faith adjacent young people, what they tend to say is, well, this story of the friends lowering their mate through the roof to see Jesus, is a story about overcoming difficulties and overcoming barriers and finding the strength within yourself. So Jesus becomes this irrelevant figure because the healing actually is about the friends and the guy on the mat together overcoming challenges and believing more for themselves. So they read a very kind of moralistic therapeutic message, like, what's the moral teaching? I should then go and have a bit more faith and believe that I can overcome challenges. Now, Jez, when you and I read that story, we're like, yeah, those friends are great. Yeah, that must have been awesome. But the power is in Jesus. That's where the power is located. It's not located in the friends. It's not even located in their faith. It's located in Jesus. And I think that is, our great challenge for this generation, because in this country, many kids who have heard anything about Jesus have heard about it in a collective worship RE lesson 5, where it's kind of has to be the safest version. So I think deconstructing as leaders, how are we helping this young person kind of deconstruct these layers of moral teaching? What will I do in that kind of sense, and allowing them to see the power is in Jesus. And then I think in our church Christian communities, whatever church tradition you're from, it's about demonstrating power encounters. This generation of young people, like all people, I think, are looking to see where good power comes from. Power that changes you, power that is bigger than you. And I think if we can be Christian communities that demonstrate that we are in awe of the power of God. What we do in St Luke's is we're a very charismatic Church of England church. We light fire pits. We do prayer walking. We have times of worship inside. We have big discussions. We plan some stuff, and other times we just grab the moment and think, they're ready for this chat right now. Let's have it. So you can't program people to encounter Jesus, but you can create spaces where you stir curiosity. And as leaders, we have got to be at the front of the line, on our knees, pursuing the presence of God, encountering the power of God in our lives, because what we catch is contagious.
So as I hear you, I can't stop thinking about the young people of my own church, and those young people are not only spirit filled but also spirit led, and they love prophesying, they love praying over their friends, and they are able to reach their generation in a way that I didn't experience any of it as a teenager.
Wow.
Do you think this generation is the one who could possibly bring back even their parents and grandparents back to the church?
Wow. Do you know, I hearing you say that, my heart is so hungry for our young people to be like that. We're a church plant on a deprived estate, and we're just at the beginning of discipling young people. So our prayer is that we will see them step into more of that. But I love your comment about, is this a group of young people who will see across the country bringing their families to Jesus? I think the answer is yes. And I'm hearing that, Jess, from all different corners of the church, from the Anglo-Catholic tradition, the Baptists, the Pentecostals, the Church of England, for goodness sake. Thank goodness God is still involved with us. I'm really hearing people saying it's children, and it's quite young. So what we find in our estate is 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds. They're bringing their households to Jesus. And I think there's something about our under 15s generationally are quite similar to our over 80s. So if you think about the over 80 and 90-year-olds in the UK, they were growing up in a time of food rationing, war, global war, fear, uncertainty. This generation who are under 15, they're growing up in an age of food banks, food rationing, global war, power breakouts and shortages. And I'm seeing also a real love and respect and kindness between those two generations. So on our estate here, we're a youth resourcing church. And when we arrived, there was about 15 women in their 80s and 90s that used to be part of this church, and the church then was closed. And so when we arrived, someone said to me, would you like them? Yeah, do you want them to be part of the beating heart of this church plant? And I was like, oh, it'd be lovely if they come, but I'm not sure. Now I would say, oh yeah, give me the 80 and 90-year-olds, because there's something about how they understand life. There's something about how they're holding on to Jesus. They've seen it all. They've been through it. They're passionate for him. And we're seeing that with the little ones as well. So I think you're right, Jess, that this is a generation, for a variety of reasons, I think are going to be the ones that will lead the way a bit more. That doesn't mean that adults, we step back and do nothing. I think it's really important that we are releasing power. We're discipling young leaders. We are rolling the rocks off the runway. We are sage, wise, saints in their life. It's not our chance to go, okay, great, they don't need us. But it is important that we are the generation of leaders that release power quicker than previous generations did.
Wow.
Yeah, one of the British sayings that we have, isn't it, that is is that children are to be seen, so we want them around but not heard. And sometimes churches embody that, don't we? We want them around because we look healthy and it's good, and we do want them to hear about Jesus, but we don't necessarily give them a voice or a platform. How do we raise up the next generation of leaders? What does that look like for us to do that?
As you were asking me that question, my mind went immediately to our Sunday morning gatherings and the incredible gift that neurodivergent young people and children are to the church, because you hear them and they say things that adults don't say, and they move around and they're really embodied in their worship. And so I think young people, and particularly young people who have complex backgrounds, trauma, experiences, questions, are an extraordinary gift to the church, because if you're going to love young people as they are, you realise that often the culture, the way that we do church, doesn't really work for adults often, let their kids. But your brilliant point about raising up leaders, this is an interesting one for me, Jez, because I think I had that tension of, I want to raise up leaders, recognising that Jesus surrounded himself with his disciples who were young, and there's something really exciting about what the Spirit does with young people. So many big movements, social movements, are because young people got on their knees, or young people were willing to pour their youthful energy into something, and they took risks and were bold. I also think that this is a generation of young people who are highly socially anxious and have a lot of uncertainty, and many of them see the idea of leadership as something they don't want to be involved with, because what they see is the kind of global leadership, or the political manoeuvring, or people saying one thing and doing something else. They don't always see authenticity. So I think leadership for us as Christians, we know that our model for that is Christ. He comes and lays down his life. So I do think this is a time where, if we are churches that are seeking to raise up leaders, we need to pay attention to the leadership that we're modelling. Not just diversity and age diversity, but are we modelling Christ-like values? Because we want to invite young people to lead in a Christ-like way. So we can't assume they know what we mean when we say leadership. And I think also raising young leaders is being heavily invested in their life. It's discipleship. It's come watch me and get involved, and then you do it and I'll watch you and be close by you, and I won't drop you if suddenly you make a mistake, and you won't be dumped and abandoned. And so I think we need to think quite strategically about what we mean by raising up leaders. Is it simply want a few teenagers on the platform to make us look good? Or is it genuine? We have leaders in our leadership meetings. We have young people in our leadership boards. We have young people that co-preach. We have young worship leaders, like Jesse was saying. We have some of our great intercessors, are the 13-year-olds. And we don't say, look, we've got a teenage intercessor. We say, we've got one of our leading intercessors. So I think we need to kind of interrogate our language a little bit, but also make sure at the heart of it, are we modelling the leadership we would love these young people to emulate, and then be unleashed into even greater things and emulate to us what leadership is. There are some great resources out there, and I know that you guys develop lots of that stuff yourself, which is really exciting, but I think that wider conversation is really important.
And do you think that means that just the way in which we are the church might need to change, and particularly just thinking about that idea of being family, and how just young people, you how significant those intergenerational relationships are, and how do you foster them in a way that means that you are able to live life
Yeah.
alongside them, but maybe often youth work approach would be do a ministry where it's just young people, and I'm not saying that's bad, but is there a way in which including people into our lives will help us both reach them but also develop them?
I think if anyone's just listening to this audibly, my head is going like an absolute bird. I'm like, yes, 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 as you're asking me that question, Jess. I think you're spot on. Interestingly, the church, a Christian church across the world is growing. The global population is growing by 1% each year. The Church of Jesus Christ, across traditions, across countries, denominations, is growing by 2% a year. It's declining in the West. But in the global South, the church is growing urban, young, and not white. And I think there's a huge amount that the church in the West can learn from the church in the global South. And I think one of the things that the church in the global South does, you will know this more than me, is they do family. Like, actually, culturally, family is not this fragmented thing. It's much more of a dynamic community thing. Moving on to this estate in Blackburn in the north of England 2 years ago, my husband and I suddenly realised that the way that this church, we express church, would need to look radically different, because we're on a deprived estate where young people don't expect to be siphoned off with just their peers. In fact, that's possibly the last thing they want sometimes. They want intergenerational relationships, because life can be so incredibly chaotic and difficult. And they have people missing. Dad is missing. Lots of dads are missing. They're often raised by granny, because mum is doing many hours of different jobs to make ends meet. And so their experience of life is much more of this big sort of household. And so here we've learnt that the way that young people in our community are best discipled is they have these multiple opportunities of meaningful relationships across demographic, across traditions, across age groups, across experiences. But you've got to, if you're going to do that, you've got to do that well, because you need good safeguarding. But that safeguarding is not a barrier to us doing youth ministry. Let's not think that safeguarding stops us doing youth ministry. It helps us make sure that what we do really well and really safely. So we, at St. Luke's, our little rule of thumb is everything that we put on, every gathering, every event, every class, every course, our expectation is that teenagers will be there. The only exception is the marriage course, the marriage prep. But everything else, we expect that our teenagers will rock up to it, and they do. And we also make space for them, then having good conversations across ages and across spaces. There are some conversations that are not appropriate for them to be in, but we make space for that as well. And I think we're seeing the adults really grow in faith, because if you're in a group, a Bible study with a 16-year-old who is spending all their time on, they're the only Christian voice on TikTok, or they're the only Christian in their class, and they're sharing Jesus, like, that will challenge you as a 34-year-old who maybe hasn't talked about Jesus for a while. So I think we're seeing it benefits adults to have young people being discipled alongside them, and it definitely benefits young people. How we do that, Jez, it's going to look different in different churches. And I think a church plant is easy because you're starting from scratch. If you're listening to this and you're a leader of a church of 500 with very well-defined youth and children's spaces, and that's working for you, brilliant. Don't feel you've got to suddenly mix all that up. But I would suggest that you ask yourself, is the main body of Sunday morning really experiencing the gifts of the voice of young people in this space? Are we missing out? And if you are a church leader, get yourself on the youth worker rota. So there are some Sundays where you're not at the front preaching or leading, and your community, your congregation, like, where is he? Where is she? And like, oh, well, they're doing the teaching for the 5 to 7-year-olds today. Like, just really demonstrate that you view all these ages as disciples. You want to disciple them. Why wouldn't you want to be discipling 5-year-olds? Not all the time, I can do it like once a month or once every 6 weeks. I can't cope more than that. But there's some good questions that could challenge us, yeah.
So now let's say I'm a mom and I'm listening to you, Rachel, and I'm like, wow, this girl, I would love to be her best friend, when to be part of our church. But I have two teenagers. My church is not particularly something very exciting for the teenagers, and they don't have any vision for that. What will be your advice for this mom of teenager who would love to see them thriving and growing and
So firstly, my heart goes out to you, and I think being a parent or a foster carer or a step parent of teenagers is such a precious season. It goes really fast. So I'd encourage you to, before the Lord, say, what does it mean for me to be parenting these teenagers for now? What are things that I might want to do differently? Like, could actually once a week, I say to my teenagers, I'd love you to have your mates around for dinner. We're going to have open house, or whatever it might be, like on a Wednesday night, bring your mates around, let them do their homework here. Like, how could you use your home, your flat, wherever it is, to create space for young people? Now, that might not work with your teenagers. That might be the last thing that they want. But it might be that that's a great way for you to sort of meet some of their friends. And actually, you've got a little group then that you are supporting to disciple in a very light touch way. The second thing I would say is prayerfully say, Jesus, will you just put a highlighter pen or a light bulb over the heads of other adults in my church community or in this wider community in different churches that also have teenagers and have a passion to raise them in the faith. Because if you don't have many in your church community, there will be other parents close by to you who have teenagers who love Jesus. And actually, maybe the call on your life is to get a few of them together and to say, what could we do together? And is there a church that could host something? I think parent power is extraordinary. The number of churches whose youth ministry gets going from a standing start because parents feel the calling. I'm not going to say desperation. It feels like desperation, but actually it's a calling. And maybe it's a calling because you care about your kids. That's not a bad place to start. God often calls us at the point of desperation. So take this and do something with it. Don't just hold it to yourself. But also go and chat to your church leaders. I'm a church leader. When anybody in our congregation comes and says to me, Rachel, I think God's put on my heart X, Y, and Z, I pay attention. Now, that's not the same as saying, if they come to me and say, Rachel, you should be doing something for this, all my defences get up. And I want to listen to what God's saying, but I feel defensive. If someone comes to me and says, this is on my heart, and I've got some teenagers of my own. I hang out sometimes with their friends when they come round. I'm aware there's some kids in the area. I would just love to know, as a church, what is our heart like, and how could I support what's happening here? And I would say, if a church leader does not respond to that with openness and grace, ask a couple more times. And then say, okay, maybe this isn't a church that actually are really investing in young people. I'm not telling you to leave your church, but you know what I'm saying. I think if you're pushing that door a few times and nothing shifts, it might be actually that you need to find a church that is investing in young people and will receive you as gifts.
Yes. So in any camp, any another online groups you could advise also to this mom as support?
I think the challenge is that it's very hard for us to, as parents, to tell our teenagers to go and do X, Y, and Z. That's quite difficult. Our relationship with our teenagers is different to being with children, isn't it? But I think asking yourself, what does my teenager love? What are they into? And then finding out, are there some Christians on social media that are also into that? And they're a really positive voice. Like, there are some really funny Christian comedians on TikTok that are hilarious. But also they weave some stuff about the difference Jesus makes in their life. Like, if you have like a stand-up comic as a teenager in your life, just talk to them about, like, who are the people that inspire you online? Have you found some voices that interest you? If your teenagers love, great holidays and you've got some finance or can raise some finance, maybe think about some different summer festivals, some things that them and a couple of their mates from school can go to. There's Satellites, there's Limitless, DTI Limitless, there's New Day, there's loads of there's uniformed youth organisations. And a week or 2 weeks in the summer where your teenager is in a space with lots of other young people is a great apologetic for the gospel, isn't it? there's lots of young people that look like me here who love Jesus. So I think maybe if the weekly, week in, week out is a challenge, are there some things that you could take young people to, events locally, summer events? And it's easier when our kids are younger. So if you're listening and your kids are 8, 9, 10, start thinking about that now. When they're 17 and you say to them, I booked you on a holiday, they might not thank you for that. But chat with them. I kind of think young people are remarkably intelligent, aren't they? Don't do it on the sly. Be really overt. Say, Jesus is really significant in my life. He's real. And when I was a teenager, what I appreciated was whatever. And I would just love, I'm going to make space for that for you. So I'm willing to throw some cash at this. So how can I support you? Be really upfront with your teenager about stuff. Don't be sly. Don't be cheeky. Be really upfront about it.
Rachel, I want to ask you. This is a kind of personal question, but also maybe. Well, I want to talk about technology and young people, and maybe it's a two-parter. The first part is that my son came to me. He's only 10, and he came yesterday and started talking about phones. And I was like, I'm just not ready for this conversation about phones and connection, and So I kind of have this natural adversity towards technology. It's like, okay, it's going to open up this big bad world. He's going to be part of a Snapchat group or WhatsApp group. I'm not sure exactly how they communicate. And there's he's going to get messages that I don't want him to get, and then there's going to be arguments taking place on technology. And so there's these are real things that they're going through. So I suppose the question would be like, how do we use technology? How do we encourage it, like as a parent, the wise use of technology? And then a second part to that question is around, well, how do we as the church use technology or encourage the use of a technology to engage in Christian formation and growth?
It's so challenging. Thank you for raising that. And I really want to sort of respect everyone listening. As parents, we know our children, we know how they work. For one child, it might work for them to have a phone so that we can text them when they're 11. For another child, it won't work. You've got to kind of think what will work for this kid, and also recognizing that I think actually we want to be the ones that train our children in how they use technology. So I would say if we resist giving them any technology till they're 16, we miss the window of training them. So I would say probably 11-year-olds being given a phone with very limited internet access, with very clear boundaries. They're at an age when their brain is still at the point where they are looking for clear guidance and instructions, and they will take that on board. Now your 10, 11-year-old might be very different. They might still be like that age 14, but sort of in terms of brain development. So I think it's a good rule of thumb for parents to start training around that sort of age, because then you can increase phone use, you can increase internet use, and they then have that rhythm of, I talk to dad about this, there are boundaries at a certain time of the night, I took my phone downstairs, etc. And then it's an incremental increase rather than at 16, they get the phone, everything's on there, full access. The other comment to make is that our children are only as safe as the least protected child in their class or in their peer group. My son is 6, and last year he was coming home from school making noises that I knew straight away what those noises were. And I spent a lot of time in sexual health, working with young people in relationships, stuff around pornography. So I knew that these noises he was making, he had heard that from a child in the class who had probably heard that online from somewhere. So I went and had a conversation with the class teacher and just said, look, this noise that my son is making, as an adult, I know straight away what this is. It's a sex noise, I know what it is. But he will have heard that from somewhere. Now, he doesn't have any access to the internet at home. We have lots of filters and blockers. He won't have heard it here. He will have heard it from someone in the class who maybe has an older sibling and has heard it there. So now, and so we had a good chat as a teacher and a parent of 6-year-olds. What do we do with that? Because it's not appropriate to explain to these children what that noise is. But it was a little indicator that somebody in this class is not safe. Somebody in this class is accessing stuff, being shown stuff, and is bringing the noise and the giggle of it, and all these children are recounting it. So I think gone are the days where it's our decision what our children hear. They're going to hear that from all sorts of spaces. But we have we are the parents, we have spiritual authority, and we have authority, and we make decisions. But it means that we need to be prepared for conversations that might suddenly be needed that we're not ready for, but we're going to have to think quickly, pivot, be wise, be age appropriate, and think our job is to raise this child well, mentally, healthily, spiritually, physically. What does that look like? Do I want to be having conversations with my 6-year-old about the fact that I don't want him making that noise? No. Do I know what to say? No. Do I get on Visible Ministries website and like source the internet for great Christians? Yes, I get some great wisdom. But in that space, me and Jason want to be his parents. We don't want to abandon him to that. So it is challenging. Your second question about how churches use technology is a tricky one. I'm quite a dinosaur. And when I work with young people, I'm so conscious that they are the most connected generation on the planet ever. They've got more access to information and people and all the rest of it. But emotionally, they're the most disconnected. They struggle with social anxiety and social cues. So my rule of thumb is, if a church that I'm part of is using the online space instead of in-person stuff, no, we're not doing that. If we're using online technologies to enhance, to carry on, to add more added value, then great, we'll do that. But it's not going to, in my head, it's not going to replace what we do with young people face to face. One last comment I wanted to make is that this community here are tech poor. If we maxed out on technology, we would miss a whole generation of young people in our state. They just don't have phones, they haven't got access to all that stuff. They have it occasionally stuff. But what I do find is that they are so used to an online world that we'll have a discussion in our youth club, and when I say discussion, it's mostly us and the leaders going, "What do you think? What do you think?" And then going, "Oh, I don't know." But then afterwards, we get lots of, kind of like little messages on the platform saying, "I thought about this." So we try to use it as a kind of an add-on, keep the conversation going. For many young people, they find it easier to be honest in that space. But our job as youth workers is to also help them do that in person too. Be honest in person too. Own your voice. So I think see it as something you weave into your ministry, not to replace what you do. That's my opinion. I've seen it work very well in other ways, but that's my opinion in our community. Well, I mean, what's your view, Jed, with all that stuff? Where are you on that? How do you use tech?
Well, my oldest is 10. So, we're just entering into that world where he's seeing his peers having phones. And I think, for him, it was about being connected. He didn't want to be disconnected. He's going to be going into secondary school, and there was just this awareness that maybe they won't all go to the same school. How would he be in contact with them? He was remembering people that had been at the school, that had been his friends, that had gone, and was thinking again, well, if I'd had a phone or some way of connecting with them, I might have been in more relationship with them.
He sounds like a
So I think, just put
little boy. I mean, he sounds amazing.
Yeah, well, I think he also, there is a generation of FOMO, isn't there? Fear of missing out as well. So, yeah. So I think he's just trying to work through what's best for him. That's right. And sometimes you don't really know what is best for them, because a phone in itself is not a bad thing. Being able to communicate with him is not a bad thing. He is having increased independence and going to walking home from school on his own, meeting me at some cafes after school so we can meet up and spend some time together, and he's doing that independently, so that there is going to come a time where that is going to be helpful. But I just don't know. myself and my wife, we haven't really sat down and talked about it. We literally just yesterday had that first question and working through.
I think it really helps young people to hear the working through. And we gave our daughter a phone. So it's my old phone. So our little rule of thumb is you don't get a swanky new phone. It's a tool. It's not an accessory. So she has my old phone, slightly broken screen, and at the beginning of the summer, and then we have really strict rules on it. And there have been a few times we've had to tweak those boundaries and change it. And actually, that's been really good to sit down and talk about them with her. We'd actually like to make it this. What do you think about that? She's also she's militant about people not having their phones at the dinner table. She's absolutely militant about it. So it's actually been quite interesting for us that she's now using a phone and she challenges us, like, Mummy, you've been doom scrolling for quite a long time. I'm like, that's a really good point, thank you. So I think the moment you enter into those conversations with your child, they'll bring some stuff back at you. But that's really good. I think that is really good, and those are the kind of skills we want this generation to be able to have. They can think for themselves, they can make a decision, maybe reassess it, change it, do it differently, talk with parents about it. I think all those skills are going to be just vitally helpful. So, all the best.
Well, the best. And I think overall, what we can say about all this conversation is really, when we think about our teenager, the message is we want to work by your side, we want to work with you, for you, but we're not against you. So let's make the rules together, let's communicate, let's talk a lot together, let's make the future best for you and for us as well as parents.
That's brilliant, Jess. I mean, essentially, ignore the last 20 minutes of what I've said and just take that from Jess. That's so good.
Well, Rachel, that was so good. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope we will have you soon again on this podcast.
Oh, it's been an absolute delight. All the blessing to all of you and everyone listening. God bless you with what you're doing.
Thank you for listening to the Reimagining Mission podcast. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss future episodes, and help others discover the show by rating and reviewing the show on your podcast provider. To find ministry resources and information about GEM UK, please visit gemmission.org.uk. See you next time.